Greetings to baristas. In looking at the history of America's gun culture, we're told that the modern understanding of Second Amendment rights to bear arms is an unchanging political constant of the American way, engraved for all time in the parchment of the Constitution by the flaming fingers of the Founding Fathers. However, fellow comrades of the Socialist Obama conspiracy, this is not the case. In fact, the emphasis we see today on the individual's free and untrammeled right to purchase, harbor, and increasingly use firearms is not just a continuation of frontier tradition. In many ways, it's a distinctly modern interpretation of the Second Amendment, and for very solid social reasons. A lot is made out of the gun lobby as a mouthpiece of gun manufacturers bribing lawmakers to make gun-friendly laws, increasingly writing the laws themselves through such underhanded gimmicks as the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, as it's unaffectionately known. And this is certainly true, as far as it goes. Yet 2 generations ago, no gun makers or their spokesmen, not even the mighty NRA, would dare have pushed the radical neo-anarchist agenda on the public that we now witness, and certainly not in the name of the Constitution of the United States. The U.S. establishment would have come down on such propaganda as inciting to riot, as subversive and treasonous, and legal interpretations to the contrary would have been ridiculed. The NRA would have been infiltrated by the FBI, and its leaders jailed under a variety of criminal syndicalist laws. But the culture has changed. The question is, why? A key may be in looking at the kinds of folks to whom the NRA appeals in its pleas and propaganda. These folks may come off as brainwashed cult clones, but there is a method in the madness. First are the people who continue to live in rural areas with linkage to traditional frontier culture, like hunting enthusiasts. Second is the more modern constituency of home-owning white folks threatened by rising tides of criminal color, to paraphrase the old racial phrase. The niggers are out to get us! This, too, is an extension, to an extent, of frontier circle-the-wagons culture against Indians and outlaws, and traditional lynching culture projected into modern urban America. But the third group is relatively recent. It tries to base itself on the old frontier Minuteman tradition, but it emerged sui generis in the 1960s. It grew parallel to and in proportion with the rise of the modern social welfare state and the decline of industry. This state of affairs, the wealthy considered no better than direct, outright, dyed-in-the-wool Muscovite Marxist-Leninist communism, or the first step thereto, because it attacked their God-given right to own, emboss, and exploit the earth, its resources, and people as private property. How to defeat the socialist onslaught? By convincing the people, especially the white working-class and middle-class homeowner, in its economic decline, that this conspiracy was aimed at him as much as the Koch brothers. People who stood to benefit from policies of social entitlement could be used to fight them by the wealthy by demonizing the government that fostered them. Universal health care is just the opening wedge leading to gulags for us all. And the necessary middle step is to take away your guns to forestall resistance by ordinary citizens to this socialist conspiracy to take away all freedom, including the most important in American society as the Koch brothers conceive it, the right to own capital property. Let the government take away guns and take away your freedom of choice at the doctor's office, and next it will abolish all rights to own anything and individual freedom to choose anything. Although women must accept the right of elderly men to decide what they can't do with their own bodies or the fruits thereof. Anyway, this kind of interpretation of the Second Amendment, the unlimited freedom to possess, bear, and use arms, no matter how many innocent young'uns and schoolmarms get blown away in the process, was unthinkable during the industrial period of Middle U.S. history. From its beginnings in the 1860s to its decline in the 1960s, the right of citizens to brandish lethal firepower was firmly bracketed by restrictive laws at all levels. Any attempt to define the Second Amendment in the broad, radical sense now given prominence was firmly quashed by the judicial bench, the press, and the pulpit. It's not hard to see why. This was the era of industrialism and the open class antagonism which it created. Mass strikes, organizing, even insurrections were a social constant in this era. The first modern police forces were formed in eastern U.S. cities for this very reason. The National Guard barracks you see in every major U.S. city had their origin in the mass strikes of the 1870s, where state militias could be called out at a moment's notice to, in the words of Tom Scott, executive of the Pennsylvania Railroad, give his striking workers a rifle diet. What especially galled the guardians of privilege and property was that these strikers frequently armed themselves. They would stand on the very same traditional constitutional grounds, insisting the Second Amendment was in itself a stand-your-ground law that gave them the right to defend themselves from the brutality of private gun thugs, or even from the forces of the state, when corrupt politicians and judges, bought and paid for by the corporate barons against whom labor was struggling, called out the troops to defend property and privilege out of the barrel of a gun. In the early 1890s, in Cold Creek Valley, Tennessee, miners went on strike against the importation of convict labor to undercut their wages and their ability to organize. All petitions to state and county officials to stop this practice as injurious to community welfare and prosperity were brushed aside, as these officials were merely judicial and political puppets of corporate coal interests. The local Knights of Labor led a small army of 300 armed miners to seize the convict stockade on Cold Creek and other nearby locations and put the convicts on trains out of the district. Later, a real army of 2,000 miners marched on the convict stockade of Briceville. The stockade at Oliver Springs was burned and over 100 convicts set free. The miners then issued a general call to arms as freeborn American citizens. The governor of Tennessee, John P. Buchanan, originally a populist friend of the farm rent of labor, we know what that means, sent the state militia to guard the Cold Creek community from its citizens, founding Fort Anderson, Tennessee, overlooking the town. The convicts were then safely returned to work. And here, by the way, you see the recreation of the feudal castle on the hill and its true purpose. Relations between the new militia fortress and the mining population soured pretty quickly, as the miners insisted on attacking corporate slave pens in their communities. Finally, the miners attacked Fort Anderson itself, but the militia had Gatling guns, the automatic military assault weapons of their day, and the miners did not. The attack was repulsed, and state troops scoured the hills looking for those taking part in these uncivil insurrections. The local press, far from endorsing the miners' right to bear arms and revolt against a gulag-based economic and political order, called the miners thieves, robbers, ruffians, and outlaws. In the outcome, 300 miners were indicted by the state for crimes of rebellion and defying its authority, to uphold the legal use of slave gulag labor to depress the livelihoods of free citizens for corporate profit. The miners had considered themselves lawfully entitled, even obliged, by the constitutional order to take up arms against state injustice, indifference, and slavery, but the charges they faced included felony, treason, conspiracy, and riot in the terms of the state indictment. Others were fined, as was the United Mine Workers and the Knights of Labor, efficiently suppressing the growth of organized labor in Tennessee industry for a generation. They had defied the state in open insurrection, and law and order must be preserved at any cost. No piddling crapola about Second Amendment rights would sway the press and bench of the state of Tennessee back in said good old days when the right to bear arms supposedly had its free way. The convict leasing system, by the way, ended in Tennessee mines due to a falling out between the mine owners and the state of Tennessee, when the state continued sending more slaves than the miners could profitably use in order to collect more estate leasing revenue, and charging the companies for back rental and state losses accrued during the armed citizens' insurrection. At the very same time, in Homestead, Pennsylvania, occurred the more famous armed insurrection of citizen workers at the Carnegie Steel Mills. Again, we see a progressive Democrat, Andrew Carnegie, public philanthropist, friend of labor, committed anti-imperialist, ranting like any other master when faced with a servants' insurrection, based on equality under the law and their constitutional right to bear arms in defense of their liberties. The declaration of the Homestead Strike Committee read, "The employees in the mill of Messrs. Carnegie, Phipps and Company at Homestead, Pennsylvania, have built there a town with its homes, its schools, and its churches, and have for many years been faithful co-workers with the company in the business of the mill, have invested thousands of dollars of their savings in said mill in the expectation of spending their lives in Homestead and of working in the mill during the period of their efficiency. Therefore, the committee desires to express to the public as its firm belief that both the public and the employees aforesaid have equitable rights and interests in the mill, which cannot be modified or diverted without due process of law, that the employees have the right to continuous employment in the mill during efficiency and good behavior without regard to religious, political, or economic opinions or associations, that it is against public policy and subversive of the fundamental principles of American liberty, that a whole community of workers should be denied employment or suffer any other social detriment on account of membership in a church, a political party, or a trade union, that it is our duty as American citizens to resist by every legal and ordinary means the unconstitutional, anarchic, and revolutionary policy of the Carnegie Company, which seems to evince a contempt for public and private interests and a disdain for the public conscience." Well, to baristas, the miners seem to be determined to defend their rights by their right to bear arms, patrolling the river and establishing armed picket lines around the shut-down mill. But the only citizens deemed worthy of such rights were the private gun thugs of the Pinkerton Agency, at the Carnegie Company dispatched by armed barges down the Monongahela River to defend the rights of industrial corporate property. When the Pinkertons attempted to disembark at Homestead Landing, they were met with gunfire from miners on shore. A gun battle ensued, followed by filling the river with oil to burn the barges, followed by dynamite thrown at the barges. The Pinkertons surrendered to the strikers and were released with 4 dead and a handful of other casualties. The miners considered themselves lawful upholders of law and freedom through it all, not outlaws or thugs, and had no wish to be seen as such. Though when the hired gun hands were marched through town, many were attacked, and this was given as proof by the corporate media that the strikers were nothing but anarchists out to destroy civil society, that all talk of bearing arms to defend their rights as freeborn citizens of the Republic was just an artful dodge to legitimize criminal instincts and passions, like depriving rich men of the right to enjoy the fruits of property and privilege. So, the state of Pennsylvania wasted no time disabusing the striking steelworkers of Homestead of any traditional Second Amendment notions. Governor Robert E. Patterson dispatched 4,000. Was it 5? No, it was 4. 4,000 state troops to put down the picketers and put the mill management back in its executive office. A corollary of this was the attempted assassination of Carnegie operations manager Henry Clay Frick by the anarchist Alexander Berkman, lover of Emma Goldman. Further proof that the miners were all assassins at heart and that the lower orders deserve nothing but the iron heel if peace and progress are to be the order of the day. No crying over lost Second Amendment rights when it came to survival of the Koch brothers of that time. For generations thereafter, pro-union men would refuse to set foot in Carnegie-donated public libraries or let their families use them because these had been built with blood money. There were other prime examples throughout the industrial history of this period that are also strangely not mentioned by the pro-gun lobby in describing the American right to bear arms to defend one's home and liberties, such as the massacre of striking miners at Ludlow, Colorado in 1914, when said strikers took up arms to protect their families from the hired corporate guns of the Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency. Many of these miners were immigrants whose right to bear arms as citizens was enshrined under law for the first time in their lives, a mark of their status as free men in a free country. But they, in their interpretation of the law, were shot down because they did not possess machine guns, as did the private upholders of private privilege and property. The state militia was called out to burn the strikers' tent colony and to teach these insurrectionists a lesson in American law by massacring 11 children and 4 women in the process. You can bet these victims have not been lionized in the media as victims of gun violence. In response to this, labor leaders in Colorado issued a call to arms, urging union members to acquire all the arms and ammunition legally available. A 10-day guerrilla war ensued in Trinidad, Colorado, where union officials openly distributed arms and ammunition to strikers at United Mine Workers of America headquarters. Around 1,000 strikers attacked mine after mine, driving off or killing the guards and setting fire to the buildings. At least 50 people, including those at Ludlow, were killed in 10 days of fighting against mine guards, and hundreds of militia reinforcements rushed back into the strike zone. The fighting ended only when U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, another progressive front of labor, sent in federal troops who disarmed both sides, displacing and often arresting the Colorado militia in the process, fairly enough. The Colorado Coalfield War, as it was subsequently called, was the most violent labor conflict in U.S. history, with reported deaths ranging up to 200. The strike ended when the UMWA ran out of funding. There was also the Battle of Blair Mountain in West Virginia in 1921, where nearly 10,000 miners engaged in the largest armed rebellion in the U.S. since the Civil War. This insurrection was broken by armored trains containing, yet again, Private Baldwin Phelps gun hands, the Death Special, as it was called, machine gun thousands of people camped in mountainside tent camps and striking families thereof, and also by Martin B-1 bombers that dropped dynamite and gas bombs on the armed insurgent miners. Following the suppression of this insurrection, miners found ways to stash rifles and handguns in the woods for a later day, and to this day, weapons and ammunition are being found in old trees and in rock crevices of Logan County, West Virginia. Following the battle, 985 miners were indicted for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to murder, and treason against the state of West Virginia. Again, no crying over Second Amendment rights when it came to defending the rights of corporate property and class privilege. So, there is a reason why the NRA lay low during this period. A Minuteman interpretation of the Second Amendment was not permissible in any court of the day when it came to prosecuting these labor defendants. When the phrase well-regulated militia was employed, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that this did not mean the right to take up arms in self-defense just because one's other rights are being trampled in any old cause. This reciting of American industrial class war might seem, to some of you, further proof as to why gun control is vitally necessary. The point here is that in modern America there is now no open class war, no insurgent miners and mill hands, so the call to arms is now safe. Now citizens can be encouraged publicly to brandish guns at will without being denigrated as rioters, lynchers, or subversives because now they're not defying privilege. The restrictive gun legislation that at one time equated all collective armed self-defense with lynching and punished the abuse of gun ownership as terrorist anarchy or simple crime is now a hindrance to mobilizing the masses to protect privilege, now that organized labor is no longer a force to be feared. There is no danger from misinterpreting the Second Amendment when the socialist Obama conspiracy is to be fought by citizens in arms. Well, let's see who this is. Hello? The FBI? You're letting me know that this video has been downloaded into your database. Well, why? I'm not advocating violence or armed insurrection. I'm merely showing that the right to bear arms, like all other rights in the United States, is subject to class interpretation and not equally applied to all citizens. Ah, that is the point.